So, we have some big updates about Martell Holt's case, and this is something a lot of people have been following for a while. The legal battle involving Martell has been going on for over a year, and every time we think it's going to settle down, something new comes up. Recently, there's been a major shift in his situation, and many people are calling it a huge legal victory for him. Let's break it down in detail because there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to make sure we go through everything carefully. Originally, Martell was convicted of what many referred to as a DV case. The situation started when Martell allegedly sent threatening text messages to Melody, his ex-wife. These weren't just ordinary texts. According to reports and documents, he included a screenshot from an intimate video that the two of them recorded during their marriage. He allegedly told Melody that if her fans didn't stop bothering him, he would release that video. A lot of people immediately recognized that kind of threat is what's commonly called revenge P, which is basically when someone tries to use intimate material against another person to embarrass, manipulate, or control them. That's a very serious allegation, and it's the kind of thing courts don't usually take lightly. When the case first went through the courts, Martell was actually convicted of DV harassing communications. He was given a suspended sentence of 30 days, along with 12 months of supervised probation. On top of that, he was required to pay fines of over $500 and had a no-contact order placed against him regarding Melody. That no-contact order meant he was legally prohibited from communicating with her directly. For many people watching this case unfold, it seemed like Martell was finally facing some real consequences for his actions, but then things started to change. Martell appealed the ruling, and while that appeal was pending, he was out on bond. What's interesting is that when cases like this go up on appeal, sometimes the charges or the penalties can get adjusted. In Martell's case, his conviction was amended. Instead of being convicted of DV harassing communications, he pled guilty to a reduced charge of just harassing communications. That might sound like a small change, but it's actually a very big deal in the legal world. By removing the DV part of the conviction, Martell no longer carries the weight of a domestic violence record. That changes how people view him legally, socially, and even professionally. So now, instead of probation and a suspended jail sentence, Martell's punishment was reduced to paying a $300 fine, along with some standard court fees like a $100 bail bond fee. Essentially, he walked away from what was originally a DV conviction with only minor consequences compared to what he was facing before. No probation, no jail time, and no ongoing record of domestic violence. When people heard about this outcome, reactions were mixed. On one hand, Martell's supporters celebrated it as a big win. They felt like the system had been too harsh on him in the beginning, and this amendment was a fairer reflection of what really happened. On the other hand, a lot of people, especially fans of Melody, felt like it was completely unfair. They argued that Martell had clearly threatened to use an intimate video against her, and the fact that he could walk away with such a light punishment didn't sit right with them. Some even speculated that Martell must have connections in the court system because, in their eyes, he always seems to escape serious consequences no matter what happens. And now, one thing that's important to point out is that this case wasn't technically Melody versus Martell. It was Martell versus the state of Alabama. Melody was a witness, but she wasn't the one pressing charges in the sense of filing and prosecuting the case. That was up to the state, which is often the case when laws like harassment or revenge P are involved. This means that Melody's legal team couldn't control the outcome, and whether or not the charges were reduced wasn't in her hands. Still, a lot of people felt frustrated on her behalf. If we step back and look at the bigger picture, Martell's case shines a light on how tricky and complicated the legal system can be. On paper, what he did sounded like it should have been a clear-cut case of revenge P or at least a serious DV charge. But in practice, when lawyers get involved, plea deals are offered, and evidence is argued in court, the charges can change dramatically. That's exactly what happened here. Martell and his lawyer managed to negotiate an amended plea that spared him the worst of the consequences. The official documents from Madison County make this very clear. The judge confirmed that Martell had been fully advised of his rights and understood what he was pleading guilty to. It wasn't something that just slipped through the cracks. The court accepted his guilty plea to harassing communications, and that's what officially goes on the record. In the sentencing order, the court also decided not to impose probation. So, with the fine paid and the court costs handled, Martell's legal obligations in this case are pretty much done. This outcome has sparked a lot of debate online. Some people argue that the justice system often fails when it comes to holding men accountable for threats and harassment against women. They feel like this sends a message that men can intimidate, manipulate, or threaten women and still get away with it. Others argue that since Martell didn't actually release the video, and since his threat was more of a heated text exchange than a physical act, the punishment he received is proportionate. What makes this story even more interesting is how it connects to Martell and Melody's ongoing custody battle. Their custody case has already been filled with tension, with Melody seeking full custody of their children and also requesting the ability to let her kids appear in media projects. Martell, on the other hand, has been fighting for more rights and involvement as a father. Originally, when Martell was convicted of DV harassment, many people thought that would seriously hurt his chances in the custody case. Now, with that DV label removed, it's not as clear. He still has a record of harassing communications, but that's a much less serious charge in the eyes of the court. The documents also mentioned that Martell had been required to undergo a psychological evaluation as part of the custody proceedings. It's not fully clear how this latest legal outcome will affect that requirement, but it's worth noting that courts tend to look at overall patterns of behavior. Even if the DV charge is gone, the fact that Martell was involved in a situation where he threatened his ex-wife with something as personal as an intimate video could still weigh against him, and family court fans of the show have been very vocal about all of this. On social media, some people say that Melody deserves better protection, and that Martell's actions were dangerous even if the law reduced the severity of the charge. Others say that this is just another example of Martell finding a way to manipulate the system to his advantage. A smaller group of fans think the whole thing has been blown out of proportion and that Martell shouldn't have been facing DV charges in the first place. No matter where you fall on that spectrum, one thing is clear: this legal update changes the narrative around Martell in a big way. For months, he was labeled as someone convicted of DV. That's a stigma that follows a person around and impacts every area of their life. Now, with the conviction amended, Martell can argue that he wasn't convicted of DV at all. Instead, he can point to a much lighter charge of harassment, pay his fine, and move on. Of course, moving on is easier said than done. This case has been public from the start, and the details have been widely discussed not only in court but also on reality television and social media. Melody herself has openly talked about what Martell did, and the show even aired portions of the text messages. So while the legal system might see Martell as someone guilty only of harassment, the public perception may still see him as someone who tried to intimidate his ex-wife in a deeply personal and damaging way. As for Melody, this outcome might feel like another example of how the system doesn't always deliver the kind of justice victims are hoping for. Even though she was technically just a witness in the case, the fact remains that she was the one impacted by Martell's threat. For her, knowing that the court dropped the DV part of the conviction might feel like a step backward. Still, Melody has always been strong and resilient, and she seems focused on moving forward with her life and protecting her children above all else. So, where does this leave Martell now? Legally, he's in a much better position than he was a year ago. Instead of carrying a DV record, he's carrying a lighter harassment charge. Financially, he's only out a few $100s. And when it comes to his image, well, that's more complicated. Fans of the show are divided, and public opinion is not something that court rulings can change. The larger question people are asking is whether this pattern will continue. Martell has been in legal trouble before, and every time, it seems like he comes out with a lighter consequence than expected. Will this encourage him to be more careful, or will it reinforce the belief that he can act recklessly and still escape serious punishment? Only time will tell. For now, though, Martell Holt has scored a significant legal victory, and it's one that changes the course of his story in a very real way. Whether you see it as justice or injustice, there's no denying that this outcome is going to have ripple effects in his personal life, his co-parenting relationship with Melody, and even his role on Love and Marriage, Huntsville.